declare to you what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. This life was revealed, and we have seen it and testified to it, and declare to you the eternal life that was with the Father and was revealed to us. We declare to you that we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. We are writing these things so that our joy may be complete. This is the message we have heard from him and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him while we are walking in darkness, we lie and do not know what is true. But if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he who is faithful and just will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. My little children, I am writing these things to you so that you may not sin. And if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. And he is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. And not for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. This is the word of the Lord. Are you with me? Again, if you would, please. God, may the words of our mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Easter, we have mentioned before, is not just sort of a one-day holiday. And I think we forget that, but this is actually a season of 50 days. Now you have Resurrection Sunday, that's the Easter we all know. That's the one with the Easter eggs and bunnies. Is that a religious thing? Is that, I forget. So we have that day, but then we have the next 50 days, and that too is considered Easter. And traditionally, I think this is really interesting, it ends, by the way, with Pentecost. But traditionally, like we did just a week ago, you welcome new baptizees, new members into the church, just as we did. New confirmands into the church. And then traditionally, again, the church uses this next 50 days almost as sort of a time of teaching about to both those new baptizees, those new members of the church, and also as a reminder to people who've been around for a long time about the foundations of our faith. Okay, so you have sort of this time of pretty intense experience in Lent and then Easter morning. And then it spends the next 50 days almost processing what you just experienced. It's not like, most of you know, I used to lead mission trips, and then I was with I was a youth director, and we went on lots of mission trips and things like that. And a very normal thing for us to do was to go on this missions experience and experience really intense things. Most of the ones we led, it wasn't like you go stay in a building even, really. You would work all day, but you would stay in a tent, usually in the middle of the desert or something like that. You'd cook your food over a fire, you'd work all day, you'd spend intense amounts of time with each other, intense amount of time serving others, whatever was necessary. And then they would come home, and everyone knew I just experienced something. But nobody could quite put their finger on what they had experienced. And so we would use the weeks following that to process, to sort of debrief what they just went through. And we would sort of put skin and bones on this experience. We would learn sort of a language to talk about what we just experienced. And they would ask big questions about poverty, and what does it mean to be a Christian, to know that kind of poverty is around, and gosh, do I have an active role in that? Maybe do I have a passive role in that? How should I do my life, which is maybe 1,000 miles away now that I've seen their lives? All of these things pop up, and we would spend those next weeks processing, giving language, talking about some foundational beliefs so that we might understand what we just experienced. This is like that. would say that during Lent, we go through a pretty intense time. Easter morning, that resurrection morning, it's a pretty intense day. We know we just went through some stuff. We just spent the Lenten weeks thinking about all the ways that we were broken, which is not an entirely desirable time, and it can be intense. And then we suddenly have this one day where we just rejoice in all this redemption and joy and grace and forgiveness. It's a lot. And then we spend 50 days talking about what the heck just happened. So welcome. Welcome to Easter Tide. I'm not quite sure how this will play out. This particular passage is jam-packed with sort of major building block, foundational, theological things about our faith. And I think this might play a little bit like a Bible study as much as one of your normal sermons. So prepare yourselves. Matter of fact, in all seriousness, feel free to just pull that Bible out of the back of the pew. Just blow off some of the, crack that open. We're in 1 John, the first chapter, and then the first 2 verses of the second chapter. You can read along if you want, because we're just going to kind of work through this and talk about some of these major building blocks. This is a time of fundamentals, okay? Right off the bat, we declare to you what was from the beginning. Now this is 1 John. Generally, we don't know who wrote 1 John. We don't know who wrote the Gospel of John. There are lots of ideas. I tend to be in the camp that thinks it was this group of people, this thing that they call the Johannine community. What they don't typically agree on is that it was the same writer. Anyhow, it says, we declare to you what was from the beginning, which is most likely this nod to that Gospel of John that starts out like this. In the beginning. Just to say, we're talking about the same stuff here, folks. But what you need to know is this. In the Gospel of John, the next few lines, I'll just read them to you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. The entire theme of those first few lines of the Gospel of John is all about, it's about to talk about Jesus. It's referring to Jesus as the Word, and it's talking about Jesus in all of his deity. What it wants to get across is that we're talking about a man, but we're talking about God. And it just keeps pushing this idea of Jesus' deity. If you look over to 1 John, well, the beginning starts like this. We declare to you what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning this word of life. In other words, everything they want to talk about is the humanness of this man. The theological word you're looking for, that you can tuck in the back of your head to impress people later, is the incarnation. That is to say, what this community at this point in time wants to talk about is that Jesus wasn't just a God. Jesus lived as one of us, with us. And this is important to me. Matter of fact, this is, for me in particular, huge in terms of how I understand God. Because what we're saying is, God knows exactly what it means to walk among us, to be one of us. God knows about the human condition. It is not a theory for God. God is not some superhuman that never knew what it was like to be one of us. God knew our limitations, our hurts, our pains, our joys, all the way even to death, just like we're going to know. And that's important for me. That's an important message in understanding what our God is all about. It's called the incarnation. And it's worth tucking away as one of those little foundational blocks and how we think about God. But he goes on. Goes on to verse 3, verse 4, and I just want to read this to you. We are writing these things, so let's just talk about all the things we've seen and felt and heard, all of this experience, right? And then it says, we are writing these things so that our joy may be made complete. That theological word you're looking for here is called evangelism. And I got to tell you, evangelism has got a bit of a bad reputation. Maybe some of you are familiar. I think that many of us have experienced the bullhorn guy who stands on the side of the street and tells us that you're all going to hell, you're all going to hell, then there was no feedback. That was great. That worked out pretty well. Okay, so that guy, anyway, it's probably not the best example of evangelism we've ever seen. Yesterday I had somebody knock on my door to hand me a very nice tract to tell me about the Bible, and usually I have a little fun in those situations, but lunch was almost ready, so I just totally took the track and went on. But sometimes that can feel offensive to people. They've stepped into best evangelical method, or we've all been on Route 1. I don't think we can say anything else. Being cut off by that person with a Christian fish. Yeah. I've invented words for that person. That's not the best evangelism. But I need to stop and just sort of recover this word, because please don't forget, it is core to who we are. If there's something you say is important, if there's something that has given you joy, redemption, wholeness, freedom, and you didn't share it, I would have questions. We share these things with you. We are writing these things to you so that our joy may be made complete. Evangelism. And they do it, by the way, and what I think is the perfect way, which is, let me tell you about my experience with God. Let me tell you what I've seen and I've heard and I've felt. These are the things I've experienced. I can't help but tell you about it. It's pretty beautiful evangelism, and I think we need to not just brush past it as the bullhorn guy. Then we talk about our next building block. And man, is it a fun one. It's about sin. The next several verses, it's about sin. And I know you guys are sick of hearing about sin because we did just have Lent pretty recently. But I just want to point out what it talks about. Maybe verses 5 through 7. It talks about that there is this light. There's God is light, and there's only lightness in God. There's no darkness in God at all. And if we say that we walk in the light, but we are actually walking in darkness. If we say we have fellowship with Him, and we are walking in darkness, we lie, and we don't do what is true. All these things are very important things, but I want to stop before we go much further and just point out that I think we have a tendency to, I don't want to say over-spiritualize, because I think actually everything is spiritual. So I'm not sure that we would over-spiritualize statements like this, but I do think we over-magicalize them, which is a word I just made up. And what I mean by this is that if we tend to hear things like what I just read, or there's no sin in God, or God will have nothing, sin separates us from God, things like that, that are true statements. But the best metaphor I can come up with, and I don't know why this is it, is do we have people who can food, like canned tomatoes, things like that? Is this well, this metaphor is going to land great. Okay, I'm going to go for it anyway. So you put this food, you put your tomatoes in the ball jar, and you heat it all up, and theoretically that kills all the bacteria, and it seals, and that's it. But there is this great fear in canning. It's called botulism. And you always lose with botulism, in case you're wondering. You always lose. And so this fear, because sometimes it can actually sustain the heat, and there's this scare of like what it can. So a lot of times what folks will do is add a little bit of lemon juice. And lemon juice will bring the pH down to a way where botulism cannot survive. When a pH is at a certain level, botulism just can't happen. Or at least the bacteria that causes botulism. It cannot exist. That's it. Right? And I think that there's a possibility we think of God in this sense. Like, listen, if there's a little bit of sin, God just cannot exist in that situation. It's impossible. Like, there's this great celestial rule that God has been subjected to, where if there's this sin here, well, God just can't exist. God can't do anything. God's hands are tied. Sorry. Let me just be clear. God can move wherever God wants to move. And I can tell you a lot of places in my life and a lot of other places, or a lot of other lives were not remotely pure. And God has moved there and worked there and proclaimed the gospel there. So let's be clear. God's not subjected to some rule where if you have sin in your life, well, I guess you're going to have to figure it out on your own, because God can't work in you. That is not what we mean. Do not over-magicalize this statement. At the same time, it's a pretty serious statement about sin. That it's no joke. That it does cause division. It is actually very practical, very ground-level wisdom. Remember that we as Christians we are called to proclaim the gospel in word and in deed. But when we give up, reconciling with an individual, when we give up on ourselves, when we give up on our sin, when we say, this one just can't be fixed, we are proclaiming a message. and it is not gospel. What we are saying is the power that raised a man from the dead, the power of grace for the entire world is simply not enough for this situation. And that is not gospel. But to go back to this lovely topic of sin, I just have to admit, with my Presbyterian background, that this is a subject that Presbyterians love to talk about. The term we would like to use here is called total depravity. It's a fun one. It's uplifting. What it basically says is that our entire being is oriented toward, is built on only selfish, only sinful motives. Even the best we can do is somehow, some way, it's sinful. We can't generate anything good on our own. Even when we do good things, it's God working through us. It's not us. That is total depravity. And there was a reason that those reformers, those Calvin and Luther and Huss and all those famous reformers, there's a reason that they were trying to do that. And I think it's helpful for us. They were in a time when the church had become so powerful and so abusive that they were basically offering opportunities for people to kind of buy their way out of some of the sin that they had accumulated. And conveniently, one of the ways that you could buy your way out of that sin, one of those good deeds that you could do to sort of take the sin off of your ledger, was to give the church money or gifts or land and things like that. It's convenient for the church. And so these reformers came in and said, listen, we are totally depraved, meaning I don't care what you do, what good deeds you do, it doesn't get you one step closer to God. That was their idea. That was the fight that they were fighting. Now, well, first let me read verse 8 for you. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. You skip down to verse 10. If we say that we have not sinned, just to reiterate, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. Again, it's pretty clear. I will also say that Methodists, in the Methodist Church, we don't love to talk about total depravity very much. That's not a thing that you're going to hear in a lot of sermons, but I just want to be clear. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not part of Wesley's teaching, because I would love to read you a little lighthearted sermon from Mr. Wesley. The sermon is called Original Sin. You ready? Is man by nature filled with all manner of evil? Is he void of all good? Is he wholly fallen? Is his soul totally corrupted? Or, to come back to our text, is every imagination of the thoughts of his heart only evil continually? Allow this, and you are so far a Christian. Deny it, and you are but a heathen still. It makes you feel strangely warm, huh, John Wesley? But what I will say is this. Denominations a lot of times have a lot of crossover, but what they don't, they tend to emphasize different things, and that's where you kind of get denominational personalities, and that's exactly what happened here. So for those reformers, they were fighting a certain thing, they were in a certain context, and so what they emphasized was total depravity. It is true that Wesley didn't much. Wesley felt like his context had sort of been so convinced that there was no way that we could, on our own, get closer to God, that we forgot that we are still called to holiness. We are called to work for justice. We are called to make ourselves better and to reach for God, impossible as it may be. And so Wesley knew that what his audience needed was to be encouraged to, in fact, work on holiness. Sanctification, we call it. Incidentally, just before we go further on this sin thing, and I'll let everyone off the hook. I think a lot of times we know better, if we've been in church for more than 45 minutes, we know better than to say we're without sin. And so as long as we learn that, we call that the foundational block. Like we've learned that lesson, never say we're without sin, we know we've all sinned. But what I would like to do is take it one step further and say, because I would bet you that we could come up pretty quickly with about 100 ways that we convey to others that we think we're without sin. So we all know better, we're all housebroken, we know not to say, I'm without sin. However, for those who have had trouble forgiving, reconciling with someone who has wronged them, there is a message you are sending. And that message is, once again, as I've already said, the grace that raised a man from the dead, the grace that is available to the entire world through Christ, is not powerful enough or available enough for this situation. And that is not gospel. So, we may be housebroken. We may know better than to say that, but let's ask ourselves every now and then as we talk about fundamentals, what is the message we're sending? Moving on to the next verse. After saying everyone is sinful, everyone that is impossible to not be sinful, I'd love to read the next line. This is chapter 2, verse 1. My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. Is that confusing to anyone else? It is to me. However, I think it's brilliantly Wesleyan. He did the same thing. He said, listen, we're all sinful. You heard that sermon. It was lighthearted. And then said, but I call you to live a life toward perfection. I recognize that you are impossible. Go that way anyway. Seems like 1 John does the exact same thing. You cannot be without sin. You will fail. But I write these things to you. I invest in you. I share this with you so my joy may be complete and that you might actually try to live without sin. But then next line, but if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. And then one of my favorite and most frustrating lines in all of Scripture. And he is our atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. I've got to think that this was a frustrating message for the first audience. This would have been that first community of Christians, the early Christians. They're trying to work out what it means to be faithful. They're doing everything. They're having meetings. They are constantly looking over their lives. What does it mean to be a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ? They are doing everything they can, and they get this message that they should be, even though they know they'll fail. You should be doing all these things. Oh, by the way, this same grace that will be available to you, it's also available to everybody else, which I think we can both agree is not working nearly as hard as you. That is something I like to call the offensiveness of grace. That if we say that God's grace reaches as far as the east is from the west, if we say the depths of God's grace reaches even for us, what we are also saying is that it reaches somebody else, probably somebody we don't like very much. And as frustrating as that is to me, it also gives me much comfort. Because I guarantee that person that I don't like, I'll bet you we're all that person is somebody else. So breathe easy and thank God. Because God's grace is not nearly as fickle as we are. This is your first week of Eastertide Basics. Incarnation. God walked on this earth as one of us, with us. Even evangelism. To know that, to know God is to share God and what God has done for us. And even depravity, to recognize that our own sinfulness is the first step in recognizing God's infinite grace to us and to others. Every single summer growing up, my basketball coach would have us practice for 2 weeks. And we were not allowed to scrimmage. It was 2 weeks of fundamentals. And even if it was senior year, we would still do the same drills that we did when we were like 5-year-old PE basketball. We do dribbling drills. We do free throw drills. We do defensive drills. Fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. Because what my coach knew was that come season, when everything we were trying, learning, and practicing, and when the season started, there was no time to go back to fundamentals. Everything we did would be based on those fundamentals. I think a little bit that might be what this Eastertide is about. Welcome to the fundamentals. May we check our fundamentals. May we review